To start off, I'll illustrate why some of these principles with an example of a project that failed, and show how you can extract lessons from that, or how the evaluator of this project extracted lessons. This was a project run by the South Island Tribal Council in British Columbia, and the objectives of the program were to improve the delivery of justice services to 8 tribal council communities by involving the elders in, or the Elders Council rather, in justice-related programs, and by applying traditional Aboriginal healing practices through several community programs. The project never was completed. It ended after 2 years in operation. And while the evaluator found some positive lessons in the community-based and the culturally grounded foundations of the program, she concluded that the initiative had failed because of serious weaknesses in planning and implementation. And among these were, and again, these are some of the things that one has to watch for, community consultation was insufficient, as community residents and frontline personnel were excluded from the initial planning process. Second, many of the key program organizers didn't have any credibility in their communities. Third, the programs didn't address the specific needs of the communities or of the victims and offenders that were involved. Fourth, there was political unrest in the communities, and during the program there was intervention by tribal council members and elders on behalf of their own family members. And fifth, the program didn't take into account the fact that not all community residents shared the same cultural values. So this project didn't achieve its goals, but from failure, one can hopefully success will spring, and some of the lessons from that can obviously be applied to others. Now, in a review of a bunch of evaluation projects, some of which I did, most of which other people did, I tried to come up with some principles of how one could be most likely to be successful in doing this. The major lesson is that a lot of preparation is required, and again, both Val's talk and Joseph's talks pointed out just how much has to go into these things. Communities have to take the time to analyze what their problems are. They have to know what their strengths are. They have to develop programs that are tailored to their own resources and their own traditions. Where there's been little pre-implementation development work, Aboriginal justice programs have typically been less successful than hoped for. On the other hand, if you look at projects in which there was a lot of advanced planning and some time and energy was spent on preparing the community, spelling out the objectives and procedures, clarifying accountability and structures, the programs have usually fared well. And some examples here was Saskatoon House in Montreal, several of the self-administered First Nations policing services, the famous Follow Water program in Manitoba, the diversion program of Aboriginal Legal Services in Toronto. And it's unfortunate there's a structural problem here. Most of us have had experience working with project funding. One of the problems with project funding is that the projects never build in sustainability. So the funding context limits how much upfront work you can do. You've got the money for a specified period of time and for a specific objective, and you've got to rush into activity and get it up and running because the meter is ticking the day the agreement's signed. And so structurally, sometimes the system forces us to do programs that may be destined to fail because we haven't had sufficient time up front for planning. Another lesson is people need to work at increasing the community capacity. In the Canadian Forces program, one of the things that we've done is to train dozens, actually hundreds and hundreds of people in mediation, negotiation, in dispute resolution, because that capacity didn't exist in the military, or at least not on a formal basis. So communities need to develop the ability to organize and to operate their community programs. An example from I was talking this morning about the Aboriginal Policing Directorate. One of their explicit tasks is helping communities to develop the capacity to run effective and efficient police services. And that involves things like providing training to members of police commissions and band councils in governance, developing physical infrastructure, helping with improving the training and selection of police officers. If you're running a program involving community service for young people, you're going to need paid staff or volunteers to supervise the young people. and you'll need to educate the community about what this, about the nature and extent of the program. A third is you have to understand what your options are. And I was really impressed in Joseph's talk. He gave kind of a list of just about every restorative justice program I've heard of. So he's obviously got at his disposal a repertoire of a lot of different things that can apply in a lot of different circumstances. But we can go beyond that and not necessarily feel bound by what's being done elsewhere. We can venture off into the unknown, and again, my prediction is that while Aboriginal police forces now follow a mainstream policing model, that's not likely to continue as these forces evolve. They're all very recent. Researchers have found that Aboriginal communities want the police to perform a broader range of services and to work in a much more community-based way than mainstream police. And it's possible, and I hope it is the case, that in the future, police in Aboriginal communities will be as responsible for promoting social justice, which, as Glenda mentioned this morning, was one of the thrusts of the Commission here, as they are for the provision of criminal justice. So Aboriginal communities may develop a new model of policing, and maybe we in the other side of the treaty can borrow some of it back. And with increasing levels of self-government, this sort of thing is developing in other areas as well. Another principle is to work very closely with the mainstream criminal justice system. Virtually all, at least the Aboriginal justice initiatives, require collaboration with mainstream justice officials. And you can see that from Jan's talk that they're very eager to participate usually. Whether it be the corrections officials who sponsor the various parole alternatives, the judge who facilitates sentencing circles, or the prosecutor who channels cases to a diversion program, mainstream justice officials are, at the present time at least, the crucial contact points, and regular networking has to be done in order to ensure the success of any programs. And again, all of the successful programs that I talked about earlier, Weseskin House and so on, all of them have a very extensive and elaborate network of contacts with the rest of the justice system. A fifth principle is you need to buffer the program's operations from local and external political pressures. That's in Saskatoon, that's why you have a police commission, to insulate the police from the direct influence of politicians. This applies generically across the board. Unless the initiative is buffered from direct local political pressure, for example, it might not survive changes in the chief and council membership after elections. And it may not achieve equity or efficiency and effectiveness. Another principle is involving the entire community. And this is a principle that I really took to heart in the program in the military. What we did was on every base we went and had 3-day meetings or seminars or planning meetings with people representing all levels of the military. Not the typical way in the military is the generals decide something and then drop it on people and say, look what we've done for you today. We knew that this wasn't going to work, so we involved people from privates. We had people who work in the kitchens. We had people in the janitorial staff. We involved everybody in planning these things because we knew that the only way we could get that particular community to buy in was if they helped to develop the system on their own base. And as a result, bases have very different systems because they came up with different answers. So it's important to involve the community at large and not just the few people directly involved in the initiative, particularly from Hollow Water, which is an incredible program. One of the lessons that they learned was that the vision of a better future has to be rooted in the hearts and minds of the people in the community. The people who were responsible for Hollow Water explicitly said it has to be their vision if it's going to be successful. And reaching out to the people helps to develop a strong community because that's ultimately what you're trying to restore. Joseph mentioned it's hard to restore justice. Actually, what we're trying to restore is to restore community, restore bonds between people. And it helps with the legitimation of the program. It also provides access to the ideas and the resources that people can bring. It helps your group avoid burnout because many people in many communities, the folks who are most active in these things get involved in everything and get burnt out after a few years and you lose them. So without community support, all restorative justice system or initiatives are going to fail. Another is to stay focused and don't get spread too thin. And especially in communities that lack an infrastructure of social services, when something good gets started, there's this compelling desire to spread it. And spreading it can sometimes be fatal because you get it spread too thin and you lose sight of the original objective. And finally, we should try and recognize and to avoid some of the problems or some of the negative consequences of restorative justice programs. The literature does point some of these out. The one that I think most people are familiar with is net widening, where in the past some alternative measures programs have sometimes had the unanticipated consequence of drawing into the formal net minor offenders who'd otherwise been dealt with informally. You might have been just warned, now you're brought in as a candidate for an alternative program. And that may not be a bad thing. If you're in a community where an expanded range of programs is available, it may be good, but at least be aware of the fact that you may be doing this. The other one is that restorative justice programs must be fair, because this hasn't always been the case. And anybody who's gotten into the literature can come up with lots of examples of programs where the program was perceived to be operating unfairly. And if people have the perception that these programs only benefit a certain segment of the community, it won't be seen as legitimate by community members or victims or offenders. Even where all segments of the community are represented, for example, in sentencing circles, those responsible for running the programs have to make sure that everybody who's there gets to participate. Because experience with some sentencing circles has shown that there was a reluctance by some of the victims and some of the other participants to speak, and that occasionally, if it wasn't run properly, some high profile or some loud people would dominate the discussion. And further, the discussion often, again, unless it's controlled properly, can tend to focus on the accused rather than on the victim. And of course, it has to apply to both and to the community at large. The need to ensure fairness is particularly evident in cases involving the victimization of women. If some communities don't see wife abuse as a serious offense, the victim's going to have trouble receiving justice or perceiving justice in a community-based program. Rupert Ross, who's written extensively on this, has called these programs abuser protection plans that don't do anything to deal with the dynamics of the offense and are unfair to victims. And a final fairness issue is that the reaction of victims, offenders, and the community to the possibility that different people who commit similar offenses may receive quite different dispositions or outcomes. And normally, we have provincial appeal courts that set a range of sentencing that they feel is valid for particular kinds of offenses. So it's kind of built into the regular justice system that if you do X, you're going to get punishment Y. Well, by definition, equity is not necessarily a part of a restorative justice system because it's supposed to be individualized. So the outcomes of restorative justice proceedings may be very different from case to case. And in order to avoid having problems with that, the community leaders and program organizers have to ensure that all community members understand the restorative philosophy. And it's absolutely critical that the members of the community participate in the planning and operation of these programs, and that the organizers learn how the community really feels, because only in that way will the programs be truly accountable to the community, and that's the only way they're going to succeed. Thanks.